This is our 2016 conference, and last year I offered you a formal introduction to our desire to take the next few fall conferences and study some great historical figures of Christian history. Now, technically, although we introduced the series in 2015, we actually started it in 2014, because in 2014 we looked at the life of John Newton, and he was, of course, the converted slave, a trader who turned pastor and who authored a number of Christian hymns, the greatest of them, of course, being Amazing Grace. And so we had a special speaker come in 2014, and he took us through the life of Christ. Last year, Pastor Perkins and I took the reins of this series and turned the dial back even further from John Newton, and we went back to Athanasius last year. John Newton, of course, born in 1725, Athanasius in 296. Quite a difference in time period. So we dialed it back a little bit, and we're going to continue in ancient Christian history this year. Now, you might have remembered that Athanasius is known mostly for his work that he did in stabilizing the church's doctrine of the Trinity, especially against Arianism, and that's what we spent quite a bit of time on last year. He corrected the faulty view of Christ's deity, and most importantly, he did work and he influenced the Nicene Creed, one of the great Christian statements of church history that articulates our doctrine of the Trinity. And of course, last year I preached on Sunday the doctrine of the Trinity. This year we're going to move forward a few years to a man named Augustine. Now, Augustine is born in 354 AD. Orthodoxy and the battle for orthodoxy had been raging prior to 354 BC. But Augustine is referred to as the father of orthodoxy. When you hear me use the word orthodoxy, what I'm talking about is true Christianity, the beliefs of true Christianity. What we hold here at our church is orthodoxy. We're Orthodox Christians in the sense that we adhere to historical Christian truth. So, although orthodoxy the church had been working through that for years before Augustine is recognized by almost everybody who is a genuine Christian as the father of orthodoxy. This man was used by God to establish many of the doctrines and fleshed those doctrines out that we believe today. Very, very critical man in church history. The father of Christian orthodoxy. This alerts us to his influence and his impact. Now, a critical fact you need to know about this man. He was born, raised, ministered, and died in one part of the world, North Africa. Born, raised, ministered, and died in that region. And so I want to begin this evening with Augustine's place of origin, North Africa. Augustine was born into a region of the world that had been completely dominated by the Roman Empire for almost 500 years and had been influenced by Christianity for the previous 300 years. So when he was born, the Roman Empire had been in place. Put up map number 1, please. We don't have the maps? Okay, we should have some maps here. Did he say how long it was going to take? Okay. All right, let's push forward. Okay, so I had a map of Europe I wanted to put up so you could kind of see the basics of where this was. Let me see if I can do something here. No, that'll work. Okay, so this is a map of Europe. It's not very good. I thought I blew it up as far as I could, but let me kind of map out what part of the world we're actually talking about. Okay? This is the Atlantic Ocean. U.S. is way over here. This is the Atlantic Ocean. This is Spain. This is France. This is Africa, this whole region here. This is modern day Turkey. This is Greece. This is Italy. This is Israel, Palestine, Syria, that part of the world. Okay, so this is the part of the world that the ancient Roman Empire existed in. This is the Roman Empire right here. All right? This is the Black Sea. What we know is as the southern regions of Europe and the northern regions of Africa and what we refer to as the Middle East, that makes up the Roman Empire. Do we have the slides yet or no? Close, okay. Okay, let's see if yours are better than mine. Are those yours? Okay, well that's fine. We'll use yours, and I'll go back to my other slide presentation. Okay, so now I have quite a few maps here, and I didn't know which maps to use, and so I just threw a whole bunch of maps up. Okay, so we're going to go through a bunch of maps. All right, so you see Africa here. You see the Middle East. That's the phrase that we use nowadays. Okay, so that's why I threw this map up, because these are phraseologies that we're accustomed to. Again, Italy, Greece. Now, this phrase here, Asia Minor. The reason I wanted this map up is because this is terminology that we use in biblical studies. You've heard me talk about Asia Minor before, or you're reading in the Bible and you see that Paul was in Asia. When the Bible says Paul was in Asia, he wasn't in Japan and China. That's not the Asia it's talking about. When it says that Paul was in Asia, it means Asia Minor. This is Asia Minor, modern day Turkey. Okay? So that kind of helped you maybe place where Paul was journeying to. So that kind of gives you, again, all of this is the Roman Empire. All right? I'm going to skip that map. Let's go to map number 4. All right. You can't see this as well as I hoped. It's just the size of the map. Of course, the Roman Empire is the darker area. The reason I threw this map up is because of these cities here. Okay, now those cities, you can't read them, but Sardis, Philadelphia, Laodicea, Ephesus, Smyrna, Pergamum, what are those cities? The 7 churches of Revelation, okay? This is where they are. Oh, bigger, thank you, wonderful. And so these are the 7 churches. You remember Athens, Paul was there. Corinth started the church there. Philippi, Thessalonica. Paul was taken to prison to Rome. This is Italy again. Okay, so this kind of helps you understand this is the world of the Bible. This is the Roman Empire. And this is the part of the world that Augustine was born into. Now, you can leave that up and switch back to mine now, please. Thank you. All right, so let's move on. So let's look at the region of Africa, North Africa especially, because Augustine was born here. Now, what's my goal tonight? My goal tonight is to introduce you to the background necessary to understand what Pastor Perkins is going to be talking about. Pastor Perkins is going to actually introduce you to the man himself. I'm introducing to you to his background, where he was from, what Christianity was like in that time period. I'm setting up what Pastor Perkins is going to do for you on Friday evening. So let's look at the region of North Africa. Let's switch to slide number 6. This is a map of Africa, and you'll see at the top, if you can blow up the top part of that just a little bit, or just blow it up a little bit. There we go. Moving from the west to the east, North Africa includes the Western Sahara, Morocco, Algeria, Libya, Tunisia, and Egypt. Okay, so that's the region in the modern language that we mean when we talk about North Africa, obviously. Now let's move to the next one, the next slide. And so when we're talking about the Roman province of North Africa, we're talking about just the sliver that runs along the top. All right? Just the sliver. And so it's not all of North Africa as we would designate it in the modern world. It's just the top portion of the African continent is what we mean when we talk about North Africa and where Augustine is from. Now, each of these countries has a history, but we're not concerned this evening about the history of all of these nations and how far back they went. We're really concerned with the history of Roman Africa. In other words, when Rome took over Africa. Let's go back to slide. Let's do slide 4 again. The history that we're concerned about for this region, blow it up just a little bit. The history that we're concerned about for this region begins in about 1200 BC, okay, about 1,000 years prior to Christ. There was move it up a little bit for me, please. Up some more. North, there we go. Okay, so this is the part of the world I'm concerned with right now. Well, you say, well, that's not North Africa. There was a group of people who lived in Sidon and Tyre, you can't see that city, who were known as Phoenicians. Phoenicians, you may have heard that terminology, Phoenicians. They were a sea-bearing people, okay? They were Semitic, and they had a very strong navy, sea-bearing. And they influenced the whole southern region of what you see on this map. They influenced this whole region here. They pretty much took over North Africa. They built a city. If you can move it over just a little bit for me, move it to the right. They built a city here, a Carthage, that became the center of their dynasty, of their empire. And so this group of people controlled North Africa from really about 1000 BC to almost the time of Christ. Now, why are they important? They went through 2 sets of wars that eventually led them to lose to Rome. Okay? So, these Phoenicians and their empire first conflicted with the Greek Empire. And they warred with each other. The Greeks and the Phoenicians warred with each other over this little island here called Sicily. Okay. Why? Because this control, move the map over to the right a little bit for me, please. To the right. Phoenicia controlled all of these little islands in here, and controlling this island would give them access to the other islands that they controlled. So they fought the Greeks for this through many wars. We have dating from 600 BC to 265 BC. Can you imagine fighting for this little island for over 300 years? It was critical for them. Okay, so you have war after war after war seeking to control that little piece of property. They eventually won out over Greece. However, after the Greeks finished warring with them, the Romans had come into power. And the Romans, of course, this is Rome, this is Italy. You can see that Rome wanted that island, and they wanted to control that island. So there were a series of wars, and you may remember this from your history class, called the Punic Wars. Does that sound familiar? The Punic Wars are the wars between Rome and Phoenicia, called Carthage. Okay, so these two countries warred over these islands. The Punic Wars, there were three major Punic Wars. The final Punic War was in 146 BC, and that is when Rome wins the Punic War and takes over Africa. So Rome finally gets Africa that they had wanted so badly. Okay, so the Roman Empire moves to one of its further extents with the victory in the final Punic War in 146 BC. They destroyed Carthage. They destroyed it. They razed it to the ground, wiped it out, and they rebuilt it as Carthage, Roman Carthage, okay, a new Carthage. And that became the capital of the African province of Rome. From that capital, they controlled all of Africa. Now, why was Africa so important to Rome? Has anybody, a few years ago, my family and I were driving from Chicago to Kansas City, and it was a long drive, and we saw a lot of something. What do you think we saw a lot of? Not trees. Cornfields. I mean, we saw enough corn to feed the entire world. I mean, I didn't know that much corn existed in the universe. There are provinces in Canada where I'm told the wheat fields go on forever. That literally feed North America. Well, North Africa was critical for Rome because of its wheat. And so there were two things. Africa really fed Rome. The wheat did. And they had so much wheat that they sold it and had a lot of income that came through the produce that Africa produced. So North Africa was critical to the Romans. They wanted it. They fought several wars to finally get it. And then they used it for their benefit, as Rome did all of the countries that they overtook. Augustine was born in North Africa as this mighty empire of Rome was beginning to crumble. So he was born as it was moving out of history. It wasn't completely out yet, but it was on the way out. It was weakening tremendously. And he was born in northern Algeria, right? Now let me, if you'll put up map number 2 for me, please. He was born in northern Algeria, and he was, and you see this name here, he was a Berber, okay? He was part of an indigenous people group to Africa. His mom and his dad were Berbers. So he wasn't an African, he wasn't somebody transplanted into Africa. He was an African in his origins, okay? His mom and his dad were also Berbers. His mom was a Christian, and his father was a pagan. Now, as Augustine is born on the scene, Rome is in a descent, it's weakening, and people are blaming Christianity for its weakening. Now, how could Christianity weaken Rome? After all, it's a small, insignificant religion. No, it's not. By the time Augustine comes on the scene, Christianity had pretty much taken over the Roman Empire. If you put my slides back up for me, please. Let's turn then to the Christianization of North Africa. Now, if you were to read the Gospels and the first part of Acts, you would conclude, boy, Christianity wasn't very popular. I mean, Jesus, he taught and he preached for 3 years, and by the time he passes away, there's only a small group of people in an upper room praying with the doors locked. Seems that he was not successful. But the Spirit comes down and something miraculous happens. All right? In Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Christ told the disciples, he said, "But you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses both in Jerusalem and in all Judea and Samaria and even to the remotest part of the earth." Here we have, by Christ, a statement in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, cataloging the advance of the Christian faith. It would begin in Jerusalem, it would move through Judea and Samaria, and it would even go to the remotest part of the earth. Let's begin looking at this. First off, Christianity and the apostolic age. The advance of the Christian faith, as recorded in the book of Acts, follows the lines that have been set out in Acts chapter 1, verse 8. The age begins in Acts chapter 2, the apostolic age. And so we date the beginning of the apostolic age to 33 AD. The apostolic age continues until 100 AD, and that because that is about the time of the passing of the final apostle, John. And so we're talking around 70 years when we talk about the apostolic age. Here in Acts chapter 1, verse 8, Christ gives the geographical spheres that Christianity is going to pass through. First off, Jerusalem. That's the beginning point. It's witnessed to in Luke 24, verse 47. It was in Jerusalem that Christ's passion and his resurrection took place. Jerusalem was prophesied to be the center of the coming kingdom. Micah chapter 4, verses 1 through 5, Revelation 20, verses 4 through 10. Jerusalem was the center of the nation of Israel. From there, the witness of Christianity spread to Judea and Samaria. Judea and Samaria were Roman provinces. I want to keep this in the context of the Roman Empire. They were Roman provinces. Jerusalem was the capital of Judea. So it begins in Jerusalem, the city. From Jerusalem, it moves to Judea, the province. From Judea, it moves north to Samaria. Okay, we have that in Acts chapter 8, where Philip preaches the gospel to the half-breeds, Samaritans. And they receive Christ. And Peter goes up there, and and the Holy Spirit descends. So it moves from Jerusalem, the city, spreads to the province. Then it moves north to the next province, Samaria. And then Christ said it would even go to the ends of the earth. Now, this is traced for us through two personalities, Peter and Paul. Peter dominates Acts chapter 1 through Acts chapter 12. That's the story of Jerusalem, Judea, and Samaria. And Peter begins the uttermost parts of the earth. Why? Because through him, a Gentile gets saved named Cornelius. But it was really left up to Paul to be the one who would take Christianity to the remotest parts of the earth. Of course, that begins in chapter 13. Now, Paul gets saved in chapter 9 of Acts, but halfway through that particular chapter, we return back to Peter, and Peter continues to be the focus till chapter 12. Right? Then Paul picks up. That's the second phase of the apostolic age, the ministry of Paul. Paul will take the gospel to the Gentiles. Paul will ultimately take the gospel right to Italy and to Rome, the center of the Roman Empire. Of course, he doesn't take the gospel there necessarily of his own free will. He's arrested in Jerusalem, and then he's carted off to Rome. but the gospel gets to the very center of the kingdom, the empire of Rome. Now, I want to make note this evening of how Christianity spread. How did it move from where it was in Jerusalem to now being in several parts of the Roman Empire? First off, here are some places that now had the influence of Christianity on them. Asia Minor. I showed you that already. Turkey. Macedonia and Achaia, two names that you've come across in your Bible. That's modern-day Greece. Italy also had the influence of Christianity. How did it spread? Well, obviously it spread through the apostles. They're the primary reason it spread. But Christianity didn't stop spreading after the apostles died. It continued to spread. How did it spread? There were no missionaries. Church didn't send out missionaries. You know how it spread? Word of mouth. Word of mouth. It wasn't any great evangelist who came on the scene and started taking Christianity to other parts of the Roman Empire. It was people getting saved, and as they went and lived life, they shared what they experienced with other people, and they got saved. A great historian wrote this, and I want to give you his statement. He said, Christianity, once established, was its own best missionary. It grew naturally from within. It attracted people by its very presence. It was a light shining in darkness and illuminating the darkness. And while there were no professional missionaries devoting their whole life to this specific work, every congregation was a missionary society, and every Christian believer a missionary inflamed by the love of Christ to convert his fellow men. What a wonderful description of what Christianity was spread not by, let's officially spread Christianity. Christianity was spread because of people like you and like me living out Christ in your context, sharing him, and seeing others converted. That's what we want too, right? So Christianity spread quickly. It spread thoroughly. It spread with numbers. However, just because Christianity was accepted with great numbers doesn't mean it was accepted officially. And what began to happen is Christianity began to be persecuted because it wasn't an official religion. So after the apostolic age, the next age is the age of persecution, when the church receives serious persecution by the world around it. Go to point 2, Christianity in North Africa. Now, between the end of the first century and the end of the second century, so between 100 and 200 AD, the Christian faith was either established or introduced to the major regions of the ancient world, and that went on to be part of the Roman Empire. So we have Judea, Samaria, we have Syria, we have Asia Minor, we have Greece, we have Italy, and by the end of the first century, we have churches in North Africa. Please put up slide number, let's go to number 4 again. You know what? Let me do slide 3. One of the problems you have with getting maps like this is that a lot of times they're not in English. I'm sorry. Can you blow it up for me, please? I don't want to go down south. Okay, this is Egypt. So we have churches in Alexandria, Memphis, and Cyrene. All right? And so those are churches by the end of the first century in North Africa. So we have churches, of course, in Judea, Samaria, Asia Minor, Greece. We have a church in Rome, and we also have churches in North Africa. Now, please make note of this. This is before Christianity ever hit Europe. I'm going somewhere with this, all right? So, by the end of the first century, we already have 3 churches, 3 cities that have established churches in North Africa. Now, let's spend some time here. Now, okay, let me also give you this. We also have by the end of the second century churches in Mesopotamia, Arabia, Media, and Persia. Okay, so we have churches to the east. Okay, you've moved it over to the east of this map. Okay, you have churches there. So Christianity has spread far and wide, but our focus is North Africa. 2 churches here, as I said, Memphis and Alexandria. Of the 2 of these, Alexandria is the most important. Why? Alexandria was a center of ancient learning and culture. They had vast libraries in Alexandria before the time of Christ. 300 years before Christ was born, they were translating the Old Testament in Alexandria. This is a place of scholarship. There was a seminary, a religious training school for people in the Christian faith that was in Alexandria. Okay, so this was an important city, and Christianity early on was founded there. They had deep roots in Alexandria. I also mentioned Cyrene. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Pat. Cyrene. Cyrene. Okay, there was that's a part of North Africa. It's on the way towards Carthage. Carthage, of course, is here. That's the center of the Roman African province. But a little ways away is Cyrene. There was a church there by the end of the first century. Now, from these 3 spots, you have the spread of Christianity throughout northern Africa very, very quickly. Okay, from those three places, at the end of the first century, you have a quick Christianization, relatively speaking, of the province of Africa. In order to be holistic, I want to also take a few moments and talk about Christianity in Europe, just to kind of round out our discussion here. The advance of the gospel in Europe took place from the city of Rome. The church in Rome was quite ancient, and Christianity grew quite extensively in Italy, of course, where Rome is, and in the middle of the second century. By the last third of the second century, so as you get close to the year 200, Christianity is pushing north into southern Gaul, Gaul. By close to the end of the second century, excuse me. If you put up map, okay, that's fine. I'll go with that. Just drop it down a little bit for me. So southern Gaul is going to be in this region here. Okay. So by the end of the second century, you have the gospel pushing into that region. By the last third of that century, Christianity has also southern Gaul. Let me give you those. That would be Italy, northern Italy, France, Belgium, western Switzerland, parts of the Netherlands, and Germany. Okay, so this region here, because this is France over here, this region, the gospel is moving into that region from Rome in the last third of the second century. Now I want to stop here for just a moment. Africa became Christianized before Europe did. Now, why do I bring this up? Well, we live in a day and age where many in the African American community like to argue against Orthodox Christianity that it's a white man's religion. Right? It's a European religion. What we are told, basically, that we believe a European version of Christianity. Now, this is patently false. All right, it's false historically. Christianity was established, Orthodoxy was established in Africa before it was in Europe. And so Africans, native Africans, Berbers, we're going to see this evening, of course, that's who Augustine was, is considered, again, as I said earlier, to be the father of Christian orthodoxy. And he's an African. And so Africa had a strong influence on what Christianity, our understanding of Christian doctrine, became. Now, of course, the Bible sets our doctrine. But theologians have expressed what the doctrine of the Bible teaches. The expression of the doctrine of the Bible is uniquely African in its origins, because Augustine was key in formulating many of the doctrines we hold today. One of the doctrines that if you sit through the new members class here, you'll hear me talk about the invisible church. Where did I get the phrase the invisible church from? Augustine. That's where I got it from. He expressed and formulated that in a very unique way in the defense of Christianity against the Donatists. So many of the doctrines that we hold dear, many of the expressions that we use to teach our doctrines are Augustinian in their formulation. Okay? So I say that so that we're not, number one, so that we're not ignorant, but number two, so we can refute those who say that we're just following a white man's religion. Christianity is no man's religion but God's. It's not a white man, it's not a black man, it's not an Asian man, it doesn't belong to man, okay? But I do want our church to be aware of the fact that Africans had a unique role in the formulation of what we adhere to as a church, right? So let me move on then to the conclusion. I want to keep rolling here. I'll try to leave a little time at the end if you have some questions. So what we see here is that the Christian faith crossed many geographical and racial lines. It displaced the religious and cultural beliefs of many people. That wasn't received well all the time, and a tidal wave of persecution would march through the church by the empire. So the empire would persecute the Christian faith until a certain person showed up. You know what his name was? I heard it out there. Constantine, okay? Constantine comes on the scene, and he is the first Christian emperor. And he signs a document. He signs a document called the Edict of Milan. All right, Edict of Milan. And he signed the document in 313 AD. And what that document does is it says that Christianity is a legal religion in the Roman Empire. And that ceases the persecution of the Christian faith, essentially. There are some problems, but that essentially brings it, most of the severe persecution, to the end. So that is how North Africa was Christianized through that process. Let's move on. Pat's going to talk about how Augustine became a pastor. People look at him as a theologian, and he was that, but many people don't realize he was a pastor. Okay, he had a church, and he had responsibilities for the believers in that church. And many of his writings, many of his doctrinal writings, many of his theological arguments were written to defend his flock, all right, from the errors of the day. And so I want to talk about those errors that led Augustine to write. Although he was a great Christian thinker and theologian, early on, this gives all of us parents hope, early on, Augustine had rejected Christianity. His mom was a believer, but he had rejected it practically and theologically, and Pastor Perkins was going to get on that. I mean, he decided he was going to live in the world, like the world, and he completely rejected the Christian faith. Later, he got saved, and he became the champion of orthodoxy. He developed true Christian dogma. There were three errors, E-R-R-O-R-S, that particularly attracted Augustine's focus. Three things he really focused on, okay? Three errors. The first one, Manichaeism. Manichaeism was developed by a man named Mani, obviously. All right? History books will kind of label it differently. Some people will say Manus, Manichaeus, but most people say Mani, 215 to 277 A.D. And he was a Persian philosopher. He was an astronomer. He was a painter. And he was somebody who came under the sway of Christianity. Now notice my language, under the sway of Christianity. To be under the sway of Christianity is not the same as being a Christian. Okay, so he was Christianly influenced, although it's clear he was not a Christian himself. He believed in a synchronization of Christianity and Zoroastrianism. Zoroastrianism. Right? So he came under the influence of a combination of Christianity and Zoroastrianism. Now, Zoroastrianism is an ancient Persian religion that taught that there are two great dualistic systems that undergird the universe. There's a struggle between the Lord of light and the spirit of evil. And these two are in conflict with each other. Right? Now, he was a man who believed that he received visions. The one thing that's interesting about false doctrine, you always have somebody who's seeing something. I mean, and the reason that that's the case is because you have the Bible, it's revealed, it doesn't change. So if you're gonna come up with something freaky, you can't go here. You got to go somewhere else. So they had a vision. So Mani had a series of visions when he was 19 years old and 24 years old. And they were sent to him from the Lord of light. Right? Eventually, Mani proclaimed himself to be the Paraclete. The Paraclete. The promised one that Jesus had promised. And as the Paraclete, he was the last and highest prophet of God. The ladies are studying Hebrews chapter 1, and who does Hebrews say is the last prophet? Jesus, right? Well, not according to Mani, okay? Mani is now the one through whom God is speaking. In his 30th year, he began a long journey in imitation of Jesus Christ, and he began preaching his dogma and sending out his disciples. And the letters that he wrote, he began this way: Mani, the apostle of Jesus Christ. Now, he was successful at first. It was kind of short-lived. He was banned from Persia by the Persian king. He was and he fled to India and China. And while he was in India and China, he developed some Buddhist tendencies as well. So he's got Christianity, Zoroastrianism, and Buddhism all coming together to make up his version of Christianity. I'm going to say something about that at the end. He returned to Persia. He was tried as a heretic, not to Christianity, but to the religion of the Persians, which was a religion centered on the Magi. And then he was eventually killed. His beliefs went on, though. And so what did Manny believe? Now, why am I spending so much time on this? Well, Pastor Perkins is gonna mention this particular belief system because Augustine was a Manichaean. He followed this at first. Before he became a Christian, this is the belief system that he followed. Okay, and Pastor Perkins is gonna talk about that on Friday night. So what did these people believe? Okay. Well, there were these two kingdoms, the kingdom of light and the kingdom of darkness. Satan, of course, is part of the kingdom of darkness. Jesus is the Lord of light. They're in conflict with each other. Man is the result of that conflict. So what happened is the Lord of light and the spirit of evil conflicted with each other, and the conflict produced the world. Okay? The universe, the physical reality that we have, their conflict produced that. And the world is basically evil. However, the physical is. However, within each man is a spark of light. Everybody has it. Manny taught women have it a little bit less than men, but they got it too. Okay. Crazy. Okay, so everybody has this spark of light in them. Man has a good soul, a spark of divine light, but his body is evil. So how does one get saved in this particular system? You get saved through Jesus Christ. Okay, so he preaches Jesus. Jesus is the spirit of light. Many identified him with the Son, S-U-N. And he, Christ, attracts the light that is part of man's composition. So there's a spark of light in each of us. Jesus is the Lord of light, and he attracts the light that's in each of us to himself. And he stores it in the moon. All right? Stores it in the moon. Now, how do we know this? Well, the moon goes through phases, right? So a full moon is full of stored light. And the new moon has no light. Okay, I think I got that right. Let me just go over my notes here. So the light of mankind, so he stores in the moon. The full moon filled with light souls of men. The new moon, there it is, emptied of its souls of light. So the full moon has got all the souls of men in there, and then when there's a new moon, the souls have been emptied out. Okay? So this is Manichaeism, and Augustine was part of this particular system. So if the light in me is attracted to the S-U-N, who is the Lord of light, how do I get saved? Well, basically how I get saved is this. I must disenfranchise myself of the physical. Okay, so he doesn't want you drinking strong drink. He doesn't want you eating meat products. He wants you to eat vegetables. You should give up all the stuff you own, your physical, that you want to divest yourself, disenfranchise yourself of as much physical as you can, okay? And in doing that, you will release this light in you that is attracted to the Lord of light. Abandon marriage. Celibacy was taught because intimacy binds you to the world. Okay, so everything that would keep you in the world, you want to try to divest yourself of that. And you want to then be really embraced by Christ, the Son. And now, we kind of laugh at this, but I believe that these type of belief systems are still in play today. You can see some of these type of things in Oprah and in this fusion between Christianity and Eastern religions and this meditation and all these type of things that creep into Christianity. It's really this kind of fusion. This the physical is bad and the spiritual is good, and we don't believe that. We believe that when we go to heaven, we're going to have a physical body eventually. We might not get it right away, but we are going to have physical, because the physical is not evil in and of itself. We don't believe that, but Manichaeans did believe that. Right? So that's Manichaeism. Let's move next to Donatism. Now, the Donatists. At one point, Donatism almost took over the church in Africa. Right? Now, what is this? What are Donatists? Well, Donatists come from the context of persecution. Beginning in the late 1st century through to the 4th century, the church experienced a wave of persecution from Roman emperors. Domitian, AD 81 through 96. Trajan, AD 98 to 117. Decius Trajan, 249 to 251 AD. Diocletian, 284 to 305. And I'm just mentioning a few of the Roman empires. There were many more emperors than that who persecuted Christianity. So these individuals took Christians through a tremendous persecution. And in North Africa especially, they were faced with the issue of, well, I shouldn't just label it North Africa. All over the Christian world, they were faced with, do I suffer or do I capitulate? Okay? Do I suffer or do I capitulate? Two groups developed. Those who were called confessors and those who were called traitors. What do you think the confessors did? They remained faithful. What do you think the traitors did? Okay. So this is what was going on. Authorities would come to you and say, okay, are you a Christian? You had a choice to make. Yes or no, right? Some people said no, and they were. That's a traitor. Let's say you said yes. Then they give you some options. Okay? Option number one, light this incense at the Roman emperor's temple and give allegiance to the Roman God. Light the incense or suffer the loss of your property or imprisonment or even death. Some people decided to light the incense. Just light the incense. Go in there, light the incense. No one's going to say anything, come out. All right? That's an option. Or you were given this option. Do you have the Bible in your house? Do you have any scrolls? Give them up. Give them up. And we're going to burn them. So you had groups of people making a decision to light the incense or not even confess they were Christians or turn over their Bibles, particularly pastors, especially pastors, because they're the ones that had the scrolls. Oftentimes turn them over to be burned. Then you had people who were confessors, would have no part of that. Now, what do you think happened when the persecution died down? What did the traitors want to do? What did the confessors want to do? You ain't getting in this church, buddy. That ain't gonna happen. All right. So there was a tremendous and this happened throughout the Roman Empire, but it was particularly acute in North Africa. Why? Because there was and I wish I had time to really go into it. I don't have time, but there was a bishop, and bishops would have been over larger regions. There was a conflict over the bishop of North Africa, because one group recognized one bishop who the confessors said was a traitor. That man gave up his scrolls and had them burned. And you want us to give allegiance to this bishop? And the confessors had their own bishop who died and left Donatus in his place as bishop. And the Donatists didn't want to let these people back in, and there was a conflict that became a major conflict in North Africa. And so the Donatists believed in a pure church. Pure church. We don't want any traitors in there. We don't believe that there should be in the physical church that there's ever to be a non-believer in the body. Now, while we believe that too, we recognize passages like 1 John 2, which says they went out from us. Because in the first, so we recognize that the visible church isn't always pure. Augustine fought the Donatists not because he liked the traitors necessarily, but he fought them because their doctrine wasn't complete. And he introduced something called the invisible church. That's the pure church. What they want physically is not ever going to happen. It's never going to happen. There's always going to be somebody false in there. But what is true is that the invisible church is always pure. Only believers in that invisible church. So one of the things that he fought against was the Donatists are not heretics, but they were schismatic. They were separatists. Okay, we don't believe in. And well, some people would say that we as Protestants are schismatic, so maybe I should watch myself. But in the early church, there's only one. It was just the church. There wasn't a Roman Catholic Church, Protestant church, Baptist, Methodist. It was the church, and being a schismatic was a problem. All right, and Augustine fought against that, and he fought against the Donatists, and that was one of the major groups of writings that came forth from Augustine's pen. He also affirmed that the ordinances of the church work not necessarily because of the person who's receiving them, but the ordinance works because of the reality of the ordinance itself. In other words, there's a promise associated with that practice, and that promise is always true. A person can't invalidate the practice. They can invalidate it for themselves, but they can't make it an invalid practice. Okay, so Augustine also affirmed that against the Donatists because they were fighting over the issue of traitorous bishops, bishops who had been ordained by traitors. So a treacherous bishop had ordained another bishop. Do you recognize his ordination? Okay. Augustine said, yeah, you do. Because of the ordinance. Because of the ordinance. Did the person who received it, is he orthodox? If he's orthodox, he's good. Right. And so that was again, some of the things that Augustine worked through for us as a church. The last one for this evening is Pelagianism. I think that this may be the most well-known debate or struggle that Augustine had with the man named Pelagius. He was a man who was recognized in his day as being extremely moral. He was a moral man. Pelagius was. And he led an aesthetic life. That is, a life of strict self-discipline. He avoided pleasures. He avoided luxuries. He lived a strict moral life. It may have been for that reason that many believe he may have been a monk. He was probably not a monk, but some people believe that he was a monk. He definitely supported the life of monks. Very austere, aesthetic, self-disciplined, rigid, right? We don't have his exact birth. He was born sometime around 354 or 360 AD. And by what his contemporaries have said about him, he was British in his origin. Okay? He was a highly educated man. He wrote and spoke fluently in Latin and Greek. He became a popular teacher of Christian doctrine in the city of Rome in the last quarter of the 4th century into the 5th century. So from about 380 AD to 410 AD, he taught in the city of Rome. Now, he fled that city when it came under attack by barbarians, and he eventually ended up in Palestine about 15 years later, after a short stint in North Africa at Carthage. Now, while Pelagius was in Rome, there were a couple of circumstances that happened to him that soured him against Augustine. In Rome, first off, he noticed a very lax approach to the Christian faith. People were living immoral lives. They were not being faithful to the church, faithful to their religious confessions, and it was just lax. And he attributed that laxness to sovereign divine grace. He believed that the problem was that the teaching of grace, sovereignly brought to men by God, led to people who were not committed to righteousness. He particularly identified that with Augustine, who was, of course, an advocate of the sovereign divine grace of God. He also came across his writings on Manichaeism, which he agreed with Augustus on. So he was against that false doctrine as well, and so that's how he was introduced to Augustine. But he also heard about this whole issue of sovereign divine grace that he did not believe in. And so he taught the opposite. He taught that man had the capacity within himself to obey the divine law. So within man is the capacity to obey God. Why else would God command it? Why would God command you to obey if you can't obey? That was his argument. Man was able, this is his viewpoint, man was able to both come to God himself and then to live in perfect conformity to the holy life demanded of God. Right? And so what he wanted was a strict, rigid moral code that all Christians are able to do and are responsible to do. So that was his viewpoint. Now, as I said earlier, he fled Rome and he ended up in Palestine. One of his students came with him who settled in Africa and began to teach his beliefs and systems. It was through this man's efforts that Pelagianism spread throughout North Africa, and Augustine got a hold of it. That's how he got involved, because Pelagius' student was advocating it in North Africa. So Augustine refuted it as being heretical. And he also got the church to recognize it as heresy and the one who taught it as a heretic. Right? So what's the root problem here? The root problem in this particular area is a favorable or positive view of mankind's nature. That's the problem with it. You see, the basic viewpoint of this man was that man has the innate capacity to adhere to the law of God in himself. Therefore, Pelagius didn't believe that man had original sin. Man is not born a sinner. Man is good in and of himself. And he has the capacity to do the will of God. Okay? And so man should be held accountable for his choices because he has the ability to choose God, and then once he's chosen God, by his own efforts, he can become righteous. Right? Because man is good in and of himself. He's not impacted by Adam's sin. And so he believed that man's free will was a gift of God, and therefore man could choose good or evil within himself, and God gave him a reasoning mind to understand the Bible, so man can understand the Bible. He has the power in his own heart to do what God says, because he can choose good or he can choose evil as a free will, and therefore men should be encouraged to live righteous lives, and they have the capacity to do so. To that, Augustine said, man is dead in his trespasses and sins. His will is not bent towards good. His will is bent towards evil. If left to himself, he will always reject God. And the only way for him to be saved is the sovereign grace of God coming into his life and converting him. Where do we get that from? Some people say, well, that sounds Calvinistic. No, it's Augustinianism. It's Augustine that formulated that, who took to the New Testament and studied it in light of Pelagian error. What does the Bible say on man? What does the Bible say on salvation? Is it something that I do? Can I get myself saved? Can I become righteous myself? Okay, and so he turned to the scriptures to refute Pelagian doctrine, and we're refuting it today using his language. We too talk about the sovereign, divine grace of God that's necessary for the conversion of a lost soul, because man is dead in his trespasses and his sins. Right? And so that's the final theological set of arguments that Augustine is particularly known for: Manichaeism, Donatism, and Pelagianism. 3 errors that he defended his church against and gave us what we call today orthodoxy. Any questions on the opening introduction here? I know you may have a lot of questions on the man. Pastor Perkins is going to answer those questions. But any questions on my introductory part this evening? Yes.
Could you explain that one?
Yes. A semi-Pelagius view is going to argue basically that man is a sinner, and if left to himself, he won't choose God. However, what God does do is God gives man a measure of grace short of salvation, but enough to jumpstart his will so that he can choose God. So they would believe in a type of depravity, not as strongly as Augustine, and they would basically say that man just needs a push. He needs a push. That's in simplistic terms. Augustine would say that man is elect from the foundations of the earth, which is part of the process by which God draws man to himself. Pelagius would say that God chooses men based on him foreseeing their good deeds. Semi-Pelagians would say God foresees people choosing him and then chooses them based on them choosing him. So that's basically how the semi-Pelagian view tries to kind of mediate in between the two. It doesn't do a good job. It doesn't do a good job, obviously. But that's the goal. And, of course, that viewpoint would be basically Methodist doctrine, Arminian doctrine. Yes. What we need to understand is that this man, Augustine, born an African, is considered by many to be the father of Christian orthodoxy. What we believe today as Orthodox Christian doctrine, the formulations of it are coming from him. Now, of course, they're from the Bible ultimately, but theologians study the Bible and formulate doctrinal truth from the Scripture. Augustine is the one who is formulating many of the doctrines that we hold dear today. And so I was just basically trying to argue that Christianity is a European religion, doesn't understand history. If anything, it's Middle Eastern and African, because that's the core of what eventually develops into Christianity as we know it today. Yes.
Historical context for me, you mentioned that the Edict of Milan was signed by Constantine which established Christianity as an official religion in 313 AD.
As a legal
As a
religion.
legal religion. So can you put, because I hear the argument a lot, particularly in my age group, because of we tend to hear from the Black Hebrew Israelites that, you know, Christianity is the white man's religion, and they always use the defense about, you know, the Council of Nicaea and Constantine. But based on your assertion, that happened almost 2 centuries later. Can you put into context, like, the Council of Nicaea, like, when was that in relation to Constantine making Christianity the official religion?
Okay, so the Council of Nicaea was in the late 200s? No, I'm looking at Pat. Yeah. $325? I had it in my notes here. So you're saying it's before when now? What was your?
Know that date so that I can historically put it into a context and say Christianity was already well established in North Africa well before Constantine put his stamp.
Oh yes, yes, because we have Christian churches in those 3 cities that I said. We have those Christian churches by the end of the 1st century. That's before 100 AD. So Constantine is coming. He becomes the Roman emperor in, I believe it's 304, and he signs the edict in 313. So that's a good 200 years after we already have churches in North Africa.
You also have Africans at Pentecost.
Yes.
Okay.
There we go.
All these 3 isms,
Manichaeism,
A, B, and C,
Donatism, and Popeism. Yes.
do you feel as though even from the Reformation, a lot of this stuff has reinvented itself in all the churches, particularly when Paul, Corinth, Galatians, Ephesians, all these different books that Paul addressing these churches too? I see so much of that stuff in each one of them over a period of time, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right to say that these ancient errors tend to resurface in the modern church, and the Reformation came along and recognized the corruption of the church in that era, and so they went back to Augustine as the standard of orthodoxy, and then moved forward from him. So they skipped over what we call the Middle Ages. They skipped over the Middle Ages altogether. They just went, what did Augustine teach? That's orthodoxy. Skipped the Middle Ages, and the reformers went on from that point forward. And but these errors are errors that do come up again in the history of the church. Yeah, absolutely.
Second question. At the day of Pentecost, when they had all these different people from different places of the world, and like you start off saying, we learned from rote or somebody done repeated it stuff down
Yes.
through history and stuff like that. Why do you feel that it stuck in Northern Africa, Algiers in particular? Do you think it was because of what is that, the main school of thought there?
Alexandria?
Alexandria.
Is without a doubt, Alexandria was very influential. I mean, I think that can't be ignored. Why all of this Christian activity in North Africa? It's a good question. What we do know is that Augustine was a genius, without question. You know, he was a brilliant man, and learned and was a staunch defender of orthodoxy as we know it. Athanasius, who we studied last year, the same. He's another African who was a father who defended orthodoxy. Why these Africans? I don't know, but it's clear that they were very influential in what we call Christianity today, without question. Sister Vicky, then Brother Pat.
My question is concerning those three. Out of those three, did the practice of beating the flesh to keep it, deal with sin, did they practice that, or did it come out of that? Because that was something that I've heard people talk about, trying to deal with their sin by beating their flesh because
Yes.
the flesh was sinful.
Yeah, that aesthetic lifestyle that predates this time. I mean, you have the aesthetic Tertullian. Is he? But I forget if it was him or I forget who I'm thinking of off the top of my head. But you have that aesthetic practice introduced into Christianity probably in this 2nd century.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think one of the reasons that North Africa was so Christianized is because Christians traveled there, and really that's where it was safe as far as Rome's control,
Yeah, that's true.
both on the water and on the land. And Christians traveled, and when they traveled, they took the gospel with them.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't penetrate into, southern or the central parts of Africa, because Rome doesn't have any control over those parts, and it's not safe to go down there, and there's no trade going on down there. There's no reason to go that direction.
Yeah. If you're being persecuted, you want to run as far away from Rome as you can get. Any other questions on the lecture this evening? All right. Well, Pastor Perkins continues the story of Augustine on Friday, but he's going to actually get into the story of the man himself, who he was, his background, how he was raised, the elements of his life that we ought to be drawing some inspiration from. And so Pastor Perkins will be taking us through that on Friday night and Saturday morning.